We are guilty from birth and there's no escape. This is a radical statement, yet it's true in the world of the trial. There is no guilt without the law, and the law is the starting point of the trial's narrative. It's also the most ambiguous concept, sometimes as an actual entity, sometimes as an elusive and silent mystery. The trial process is the basic framework of the novel, and is cruelly generalized by some as only a symbol of the dystopian world. Thus, many surveys into the law remain only at the level of a sketchy introduction. To dive deeper into this concept, law undoubtedly plays a double role in this text. It simultaneously appears as a symbol for lack of freedom and the sublime truth of life. The former squeezes the case increasingly narrow limit space through the omnipresent power of the lower court, while the latter gives a sublime meaning to case a series of actions through the higher court. Part 1. The Arrest. Someone must be telling tales about Joseph K. For one morning, without having done anything wrong, he was arrested. Such a seemingly absurd morning marks the beginning of the trial and K's association with the law as a marginalized person. This is a typical Kafkaesque opening. The protagonist suddenly finds himself disconnected from his surroundings. Such disconnection is crucial to understand Kafka's text because this is the beginning of this nightmarish world. The pattern of Kafka's work can be summarized as such. Joseph K's arrest and trial, the sudden disruption in this story, is clearly not symbolic. So if we take the law and guilt in this text literally, what is K's guilt? From the perspective of modern jurisprudence, K is innocent because there is no clear plaintiff in the novel and the court cannot find any evidence of his crime. In the preliminary hearing, the judge does not know K's identity and even asks whether K is a painter and decorator, suggesting that the court may have even made a mistake in arresting him. A deeper look at the novella's trial process can help decode the reason for his arrest. From the beginning of his arrest, the protagonist is rapidly withdrawn from his stable everyday life, cut off from his familiar life experience, and at once thrown into the contact with mysterious situations. This storytelling pattern resembles not the formal modern trial process, but rather the birth of someone. If one changes the word arrest to birth, this description still stands solid and even makes more sense. This brings another fact that deserves attention. K is arrested in his bed on the morning of his 30th birthday. The timing is not simply a reference to his execution at the end of the novel, on the day before his 31st birthday. It's possible that the detail is meant to be the rebirth of a person, meaning that from the beginning of his birth, K is already involved in such an endless and absurd lawsuit. K's will to escape means the attempt to place his own tiny and finite word about the big and infinite legal system, which can potentially undermine the regular justice system. And this is the guilt that the RSA and ISA, in ultra-search terms, designate K, his existence. If K's existence is already guilty, then how can he escape? Sadly, Kafka did not offer him the solution because the law's sublime truth in this novel is physically and spiritually inaccessible. In the known text of the trial, K's case always remains in the pre-trial stage with the higher court, as the representatives of the law always absent. The image of the lower courts has a common distinctive feature. Most of them are located at the edge of the city. The court where K's first trial took place was in the remote street of Julienstrasse. The dark house of lawyerhood was in the district where the court offices were, not to mention the deserted and desolate quarry where K was finally executed. The center of the legal system of K City is always vacant. Kafka's topographical arrangement expresses the void of the higher court in the center of the town, and this arrangement tells readers that the law is inaccessible physically. In addition to those physical barriers, the identity of the defendant is another reason for this inaccessible feature of the law. The law, through its absolute power, assigns Joseph K. the status of defendant, and it's interesting to know that during his arrest, K already repeatedly used the act of shaking hands to get rid of his identity as a defendant, such as to settle the matter with a shake of hands, and an agreement like this must be sealed with a handshake. Will she shake my hand? However, K's several attempts to seek reconciliation are all rejected, which shows that he is incompatible with his surroundings once arrested. This incompatibility is pressing on his nerves and imprisoning his mental freedom. What's more, the public disclosure of his status as a defendant brings great distress to K's life and work. In his life, Elsa and his uncle show varying degrees of interest in his case, while at work he is distracted by the struggle with his assistant manager, which makes it possible for him to concentrate on his work. This distress introduces the fundamental paradox of the novel. The law must be realized and reached through a series of trial processes, and in this whole process, the court and the law require Kate to accept the status of the defendant. This means that Kate needs to become the defendant to get rid of his guilt and to eliminate the status of defendant to live undisturbed. He is thus stuck in this ambiguity of identity and cannot reach the law. In such a cruel and unjust world, the hope for salvation seems to be unavailable, just like those higher courts. However, Kafka still offers us a ray of light coming from the door of the law and the human figure under the light at the end of this novel. Those images offer the possibility of an about-face that can potentially reverse this chaotic order of this world. Therefore, instead of seeing K's life as an endless deferral or deference, we can see the closing of the door and the death of K as a fulfillment of the law, and thereby ends its oppressive effects, bringing about the inversion of the negative state of exception into a state of freedom.